I can see people are joining as we speak, and I'm going to welcome you to the Responsible Leather Roundtable Summit, which is part of our 2020 virtual conference. So as people are coming in, I want to start by saying a really heartfelt and warm thank you to the conference sponsors for this year's event. It's definitely taking a bit of a risk to sponsor a virtual event, but we couldn't have done it without them. And as you can see, we've been very, very well supported by these wonderful companies. So please take a moment and give them a nod of thanks for us. And with that, I'm going to welcome you to the official start of the Responsible Leather Roundtable Summit, part of our Climate Plus vision. So first, an overview of the vision and mission and strategy for Textile Exchange. Our mission has evolved to continue to inspire and equip people to accelerate adoption of preferred materials in textile value chain. And now we focus on carbon reduction, soil health, water, and biodiversity as part of our holistic approach to drive positive impact for the entire industry. And our vision is still a global industry that protects and restores the environment while enhancing lives. And by 2030, we aspire to guide the textile industry to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% from a 2020 baseline. And our strategy is to accelerate climate action in the textile industry by providing trusted data and reporting, market-based solutions, and a community that can do what no single company or organization can do alone. And on the housekeeping front, the antitrust statement, I do have to read this. Textile Exchange convenes the textile community and values diversity of views, expertise, opinions, backgrounds, and experiences. It is expected that members of this community will collaborate by sharing ideas, information, and resources of publicly available information only, and avoid discussions on price, strategic plans, or other private and sensitive information. So thank you for respecting that. And now into the summit itself. I'd like to start by introducing you to the Responsible Leather Roundtable team. And starting off at the top, we've got Anna Heaton, who has graciously agreed to be the chair of our Animal Welfare Committee. Cole Lambert, employee of Textile Exchange. She's the chair of the Leather Production Committee, but she went on to maternity leave this spring and summer. So we had Deborah Taylor, who came in and was the interim chair of the Leather Production Committee for a while. Larissa Velachko holds us all together. She's the impact coordinator, and I'm sure you all recognize her name from many emails. Josefina Aysel, who is the chair of our Deforestation Conversion Free Committee and also is a part of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We have Stephanie Pekorski, the Innovations and Standards Senior Coordinator, now based in British Columbia. And I'm Anne Gillespie, the Director of Impact Acceleration. On this call, we will be introducing at a later date one of our celebrity speakers, with Claire Bergkamp, who's the COO of Textile Exchange as well. So before we start, just a few things. If we could ask you to change your name on the participants list to include your first and last name, and even your company name if possible. Also, there are two functions. There's the chat function and the Q&A. We will only be using the chat function to send you links and information that are web URLs, but any communication with us or comment you want to give, please use the Q&A, post your questions and comments as we go. And the team will be answering those as we go. We have a bit of time at the end, hopefully, to answer some of them live, but we'll try to do as much as possible through this. And the number one question we always get is, will this webinar be shared? Yes, it will. It is going to be recorded, and the links and the notes and the recording will all be sent out along with the slides. So here we are. For the next couple of hours, we are going to be digging in deep to leather and the future. We'll start with some industry updates, looking at overall industry updates, and then some of the specific tools that we've been working on through Textile Exchange. Then we're going to look really deeply at leather and the Climate Plus strategy. Claire's going to talk to us about the strategy itself, some of the pivots and changes we're making at Textile Exchange, and then we'll really dig into what are the opportunities we have with leather and beef. We do get a brief break, and then we're going to convene back together, and I really please come back after the break, because this is where we're going to crowdsource your thoughts and ideas, and then we'll make it to the end. Just a note, this is a webinar format. We have over 225 participants registered for this call. So we couldn't put it on a regular Zoom function. It's a webinar function, which limits the ability for people to participate and create those breakout rooms. So we will be using Mentimeter, which is a really slick and fun polling service. So yeah, before I go, I just want to introduce you. That's my daughter, and those are my cows. So I'm now pretty tied to this leather value chain. All right, and now for you. I want to warm everybody up. Be sure you're engaged, and we'll ask you to use not the chat box, but the Q&A box, and say hello in all of the different languages that you speak. That would be great. And then tell us what country you're in and how long has it been since you've seen a real live cow. We'll see which of you are real farmers here. Oh, everybody's saying hello. Oh, we've got some interesting languages coming through. This is fantastic. All right, we have some cow viewers. This is fantastic. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go straight into the industry updates, and Deborah Taylor is going to lead us through this next section. So Deborah, if you want to go.
Hi everyone, I'm really glad to be with you all today. So we're just going to spend the next few minutes just doing a quick review of some of the industry news that's around in the leather industry right now. And to start with, it's appropriate that we take a little look at the impacts of COVID-19. We've got various degrees of impact depending on country, but overall it's expected that global leather production has dropped between 20 and 30% on average, based on reduced operations and demand. In the early part of the year, in the full lockdown, that was a much higher expectation, more like 50%. And I know some tanneries were experiencing 70% reductions in their order books. However, as things rallied in the second half of the year, there's been an improvement there. And so we're looking at 20 to 30% on average. We won't know that until we're through the other end as to how realistic that is overall. And of course, we do know that some of the worst affected areas have been those low-income, high-producing countries like India, where they're just not equipped for something so significant as a total shutdown for any period of time. And we know that there are some tanneries that as a result have been forced to close for good. If we think about brands and retail sales, although the footfall in stores has decreased dramatically, fewer losses than anticipated have been experienced because online sales have kind of bridged that shortfall somewhat. So from a brand perspective, I don't think the impact has been quite as significant as everybody was fearing. But again, we're not through the other end yet, so we still can't say for definite. And then I think something that I wanted to just touch on, although fur isn't leather in the true sense of production, it does still have those same linked sensitivities, and an unintended impact of COVID-19 on the fur industry has been quite dramatic, with Copenhagen Fur, one of the largest auction houses for fur, set to close gradually over the next 3 years. And this is due to the potential of the mutation of the COVID-19 infection from mink to humans. It's estimated that it has contaminated 200 people in Denmark that were working in mink. So this potential crossover from animal to human could exist. and a mass cull of 17 million mink was ordered in November. So there has been some really significant impacts of this pandemic. If we move to the next slide, a little bit of good news. COTANS, the European Tanners and Dressers Association, released their social and environmental report earlier this month. It was an update report. They did their first one back in 2013. And it really provides some key indicators for the state of the leather industry in Europe. It looks at a number of metrics, including the number of companies, the number of tanneries that we have in Europe, the total number of workers that are employed, and it ranks those countries in terms of the size of the industry per country. So it also looks at things like the destination of EU leather by product and a host of other metrics. You'll get the slide deck afterwards, and you can click on the links that are contained within. They take you to the full reports, which is available in many different languages, and also there's some short video clips that you can access that are really worth a watch on just the kind of pertinent top line information. Next slide, please. Oh, one back. Yep, there we go. So the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, that's quite a mouthful, but PNAS, they've just produced a really insightful report on beef exports coming from Brazil. Of course, we know the majority of leather is a byproduct of the meat and dairy industry, so this provides some really relevant information within that context for us all. And it does produce good metrics that can be considered within our sourcing and procurement of raw materials. It looks at supply chain flows, how they're structured, major market sources that include China, Egypt, Russia, and the EU, deforestation risks, and the attributable factors and allocation. Again, the link is there. You can download that full report, and it is worth a read. Next slide, please. Looking to the UK, this is quite interesting. It's being hailed as a positive impact of Brexit, but we won't talk about that. Suffice to say, though, that the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, are proposing the ban of live exports of animals. Now, this is only applying to England and Wales at the moment. Scotland are excluded from this proposal right now, although they will take part in the discussions as part of this joint 8-week consultation that is just underway. The proposal was just published on the 3rd of December. And it is being welcomed as part of a renewed push to see Britain positioning itself as a world leader on animal welfare. So you can see the full report using the link on the slide there. And next slide, please. Leather Naturally. So Leather Naturally continues its work to educate and inform, and according to the guys at Leather Naturally, an estimated 7.3 million tons of hides are produced every year as a direct byproduct from the food industry. So understanding the sustainable benefits of using that material as opposed to it becoming an environmental waste at landfill is a priority for the industry to make sure we communicate that message. They have expanded their scope in 2020, and they've got a new website that includes new fact sheets and information on a host of topics around leather. Its terminology, manufacturing, environmental impacts, uses. So it's worth a look around if you haven't seen that new website. There was also a webinar a couple of weeks ago on an update on the Metcha campaign, which showed some great results across all the social media platforms, and it's anticipated that Metcha will continue its work into next year to keep engaging with consumers and spark that creativity around the use and beauty of leather as a material. Again, you've got links there on the slide. Next slide, please. Just a couple of quick news points here. Leather and Hide Council of America, they created a new campaign this year, Real Leather Stay Different. You can find out more information on their website. And again, just this month, UNICH announced their new president, Fabrizio Nuti of the Nuti Ivo group, who will take over the presidency of UNICH. Next slide. Just a short update on the UNEC project to enhance transparency and traceability of sustainable value chains in the garment and footwear industry. We've been working this year on doing a lot of the foundation work, looking at the existing value chains, the actors that work within those value chains, the sustainability risks associated with each of the processes. And we're now just about to start work on identifying what could be a recommendation for a framework. We have to remember that this framework has to apply across all areas within the leather value chain. So it has to be interoperable, it has to be available to be used on a manual basis and interlink with a highly technological system, which could include blockchain. We've got a pilot going for cotton right now on blockchain, and we've just started the preliminary conversations around the leather blockchain pilot, which will take place next year. So we're just doing that exploratory work right now, looking at which partners could be involved in that pilot project with us and how we can look to move that forward for 2021. If you want any more information on it, the link is there. And if you want to be involved in the pilot, if you want to be considered for involvement directly in the pilot, then do get in touch either through UNEC's website link, or you can just email me directly and I can give you a bit more information on that. And I think the final slide is just to let you know that also this year we've set up a new foundation, the Sustainable Leather Foundation. It's a fresh approach to how we consider sustainability within the industry. It's a completely inclusive approach that is really looking to provide a framework that can unify the industry to create better ways of communicating the work that's being done externally to the consumer. So it is inclusive, it is designed to support the industry in a very holistic way. And if you want more information, the website link is there, or again, you can contact me directly and I'll be happy to talk to you some more. And I think with that, I will hand back over to Anne, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Appreciate all of your work and speaking. So now we're going to move into the Leather Impact Accelerator, very core to the hearts of all of us in the leather team at Textile Exchange. And as a review, and I'm hoping most people have been exposed to the Leather Impact Accelerator over the 3 years that we've been working on it. But the tool is actually final. We've gone through a consultation. Well, we finished it in the spring. We had a whole stakeholder review consultation process. We took all the feedback from there. We made a lot of revisions. We put it back out for public comment again, have had the second round of revisions, and have done the last edits and formatting, and it is ready for publishing. Well, actually, it's ready for voting, which is the next step. But the LEA itself is comprised of benchmarks for animal welfare, for leather production, we have a deforestation and conversion-free protocol. We have the LEA impact incentives, the claims guide, and the traceability guidelines. And all of these fit together in a puzzle of components that give basically a package of tools that brands can use to work with their supply chains in whichever way they want. It's quite a flexible tool overall. Brands can choose which parts of their supply chain they want to address, how they're going to use the different components of the tool, and everything's held together by a claims framework. And given the 3 years that we've been putting into the development of this, I think it's now really important to step back and look at what are the key value propositions that LEA offers. So for one, it was a very inclusive development process. We've started the whole thing reaching out to stakeholders across multiple industries, not just our own. We worked very, very closely with the beef industry and all the different players within the leather industry and animal welfare groups and so on. Because of the impact incentives, we are now have a way for brands to address deforestation or conversion in their supply chains or in the supply network and potentially in their supply sheds through the impact incentives. The program is also helps to develop improved processes over time. There's an improvement line that runs through the claims framework and the corporate commitments where brands can each year commit to tracing back or mapping back more of their supply chain, buying more impact incentives. And then there's things like the animal welfare framework, which goes from a kind of a baseline tier all the way up to a very high level of animal welfare. And as I said, one of the issues that has been facing the industry for so long is how do brands get linked back to the farms? And that's really what started this whole work in the first place. Brands are coming to us saying, we want to address animal welfare at the farms that supply the leather for our products. It has the social environmental aspects of leather production. It's a global tool that can be applied differently in different regions. It's been specifically written to be open enough to be interpreted in these different regions, often through the standards that we're benchmarking with. We give brands the opportunity to make claims about their support for the improved practices. And the tool builds traceability into the overall system through the corporate commitments and getting the different stages of the leather processing supply chain to engage in traceability, and then also through the impact incentives where we require that any farm that is going to sell an impact incentive is actually engaging in a traceability system. And then I talked about the tiered approach to animal welfare. So I'll leave it for there. And I want to move into some of the key updates that we've made in this last round of revisions. So I will ask Anna Heaton to speak to the Animal Welfare Standards Benchmark. Anna?
Thanks very much, Anne. Yeah, so as Anne's given me a nice sort of lead in there, that as I say, first of all, it's a benchmark. It's not a standard that we have developed. And secondly, that it's a tiered system. So some of the conversation we've had through the two different review periods have been, well, firstly, are we including all the things that we need to include for animal welfare? And secondly, have we got the different benchmark requirements at the right levels? Those of you that have been on previous leather calls will know that slatted flooring has come up as a topic on a number of occasions as to how this, whether this should be and how it could be part of the benchmark. And the key issue there was around the fact that a lot of the veal calf or the calf leather is coming from veal systems that do use slatted flooring. So after this second review, we have come to that slatted flooring is permitted. It's permitted at the baseline and option 1, but it's only permitted for veal systems. One of the key welfare concerns that was raised by the Animal Welfare Committee were these fully slatted systems for larger beef cattle with concerns about foot and leg health and damage to tails and things like that in those systems. So we've got quite specific now. This is a benchmark requirement that's specific for calves. And as I say, it's allowed at a baseline and option 1 within the Animal Welfare Standards benchmark. And where it's permitted, it can't be a bare concrete slatted floor. It needs to be something that is giving some kind of insulation and animal comfort. So for example, as the photo here, I'm afraid probably slightly blurrily shows you is with rubber matting or be a slat that's made out an alternative material like plastic. So that's one point we've said this is where we've come to, having had the two review periods. And that topic is probably the one that overall we received the most comments on in both directions as to where we should go with it. There was a bit of clarification here. The way the benchmark was written, it looked like it was a very specific requirement in terms of how much space needed to be provided per animal as judged on a weight basis, a weight or size basis. And it looked like we were saying an exact figure had to be met by the certifications that were being benchmarked. And we've now adjusted that to show that actually what we're saying in the benchmark is a minimum requirement, not the specific requirement. And then feedback on branding. We've kept a baseline prohibition on face branding, and option 2 prohibits any branding but both of those are, we are aware we have farmers in regions or states where there may be regulation that says they have to brand, and we won't supersede this, but where it is the farmer's choice, that's those points there. But we have added, there was concern about branding and the use of branding, so we've put in a new requirement that certifications that are going to be benchmarked for option 1 need to show that they cover topics such as the method by which branding is done, whether it's hot iron branding or freeze branding, and the placement of brands. So again, there's some regulation, if you like, or some certification standards around it. It's not just at option 1, branding can be anywhere and any method. So that's our sort of following the second review. And then if I can have the next the next slide. And the next point was also, again, coming out of the review, was actually about the benchmarking process itself and how we are going to manage that. Having said now, we have got some requirements within the benchmark that very clearly say they relate to veal calves, and then we now have some that are specific to beef cattle. And obviously we're not, if we're benchmarking a certification that is only covering veal calves, we're not expecting them to cover within their standards things that are only to do with beef cattle, and vice versa. So it's just sort of that, it's not that every single certification has to hit every single item on the benchmark. It's looking at what's applicable to what they are doing. And sort of following on from that as well, we had quite a few questions raised. It's like, well, there's this particular animal welfare certification that says this, and in the benchmark it's worded slightly differently, or it asks for one thing and the certification program does it slightly differently. And it was just almost to say, this is going to be a process that the initial benchmarking, it's going to be done in conjunction with those certification bodies and standards owners. So if their standards don't exactly match the LEA benchmark at whichever level they're aiming to show that they meet, they will have the opportunity to demonstrate how their standards and requirements and how their audit process actually deliver the same outcomes. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're interested in, is the welfare outcomes for the animals. And I would just like to finish this just saying thanks very much to the Animal Welfare Committee, who obviously put a lot of time and effort into helping us get there, and to everybody who commented on these particular requirements of LEA. Thanks, Anne.
Great. So Nicole, would you like to speak to the leather production benchmark?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Well, first, I would like to thank everyone that provided us with the feedback during the 2 review periods we had. It was extremely valuable. As you know, the leather production scope is covered by 2 benchmarks, so one for environmental standards and one for social standards. The leather production environmental standard benchmark didn't receive any major feedback that led to any major significant changes. So there's a few changes in wording here and there, but nothing too important. On the other hand, for the social benchmark, we received quite a lot of feedback. and it led to quite significant changes. We received in particular a lot of feedback from organizations that have been working on social issues in production facilities for years, and gave us really valuable feedback based on what they had been experiencing on the ground, and what actually works and doesn't work, and what has impact. So we have made quite a few adjustments. So initially our idea was to have a benchmark that was fully aligned with the social benchmark that was developed by SSCI. Due to the changes we've made, we can't say that we're fully aligned with them now, but our standard benchmark is still very based on the SSCI, but it is less prescriptive. So it kind of, we made a few changes similar to what Hannah just mentioned before, in the sense where we might have had a limit that was specified in a requirement. We changed that to something a little more open, and mentioning that the standard shall address a particular issue and not necessarily set a limit for them. So yeah, then that's basically all we've done on these two benchmarks. I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Nicole. And Stephanie, speak about the claims and corporate commitments.
Yes, thanks, Anne. So I will just combine the key updates for the LEA claims guide and the corporate commitment, as they're kind of the two brand focus aspects of LEA. So on the claims side of things, we received some very good feedback during both the first and second stakeholder consultations, and have made some amendments to the document. In addition to aligning our claims guide with the Textile Exchange standards claims policy for consistency across the format and application of claims for our various programs, we have outlined scripted allowed language for the various categories of claims associated with LEI, which include impact incentive claims, corporate commitment claims, and others. So the only type of claim that is not allowed in the system would be product related claims. Another change is that we have decided to limit claims about animal welfare to statements relating to the animal welfare options 2 and 3, which are the higher animal welfare options. So if a brand is purchasing impact incentives from farms that are certified to standards meeting the baseline or option 1, then the associated claim would be about animal management or animal husbandry. So it's a small nuance, but it was agreed that those levels, baseline and option 1, were not, at those levels, there was not enough meaningful animal welfare improvement above the standard industry practices to make consumer-facing animal welfare claims. And for the LEA corporate commitment, this has been under development during this whole time period over the past year, and we have finalized it to consist of just 2 modules now. The first one being making a commitment to purchasing impact incentives over the course of a stated time period, and the other option being to trace your supply chain back, or map your supply chain back ideally to slaughterhouse, and ensure that each supplier along the way is certified to a LEA approved standard for leather production. So that means being approved to both the environmental and social benchmarks. We've taken traceability, so sorry, it says supply chain traceability there, it should say supply chain mapping, but we've taken traceability out as a module for now, as there are not enough well-developed systems out there. However, we will add this module in when they do become available. So there's already great work being done, for example, by the UNECE, as Deborah mentioned earlier. And finally, with any module that a brand participates in with this commitment, they will be required to report into the Textile Exchange corporate fiber materials benchmark on an annual basis into the leather module for that. So you can go to the next slide. And that's it for the LEA component updates, but you can move to the next slide then. So here's a look at our timeline for the release of LEA. You will see that we are referring to this as version 0.1, but I'll explain that in a little bit more detail momentarily. So as many of you know, who have been following the development of this program, you'll know that at the start of 2020, we continued industry meetings and scope committee meetings to create the first drafts that were released in May for the first consultation. Then throughout the summer and into early autumn, we reviewed feedback that we received, had more meetings, revised the documents, and put them out for a second consultation in November. So that finished up at the start of December. So that brings us to now where we have finalized the drafts of our core LEA documents and are super excited to open them up for IWG voting today. So you see that on the timeline there. So I'll talk about voting in just a bit, but I will describe like our formal launch and continued piloting in 2021. So you can go on to the next slide. And that's the end of the timeline there. More. So as I said before, we are intentionally calling the fully released version of LEA version 0.1. And this is primarily because we know that the program needs further piloting and testing. And so we will use the whole of 2021 to begin implementation and use of all LEA components. So that includes benchmarking of animal welfare and leather production standards, verifying farms as DCF, trading, impact incentives, and more. All of these components will be available for everyone to use starting on January 5th, 2021, so just after the new year. And throughout the year, we will continue to review any feedback that we receive from stakeholders. And at the end of this pilot year, revisions will be made and stakeholder consultation will take place if needed. So we can move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, as of today, voting is now open on all of the core LEA documents. And if you just click one more time, and this consists of the 2 farm level documents and the 2 leather production documents. On the farm side, we have the animal welfare standards benchmark that Anna Heaton just discussed, and then we also have the DCF protocol. On the supply chain side, we have the leather production environmental standards benchmark, and also a social standards benchmark, which Nicole just referred to. So as a reminder, each of these documents may be used by different groups or companies. For example, a farm may work with the DCF protocol in order to be verified as DCF, but they may not necessarily be certified to a standard that meets the animal welfare benchmark, and this is okay. And similarly, only certain standards will be benchmarked and qualify for the leather production environmental standards benchmark, but a tannery who wants to participate in LEA may be certified to 2 different standards, one which meets the environmental benchmark and one that meets the standards benchmark, or the social benchmark. And you can go to the next slide. So now that voting is open, we can talk about how to vote. The process is fairly straightforward. You will first need to review the final drafts of the core LEA documents. Those will be available on our website, leatherimpactaccelerator.org, later today. They're also in the job form. So you also need to make sure that you are a LEA IWG member and have selected that you want to be a voting member. This is very important as you will not be able to vote if you do not sign the IWG charter. So we will share that with you now if you haven't already signed it. But if you are an IWG voting member, then you can go to the Jot Farm link, which we will share in the chat box for everyone, and you can cast your vote. And next slide, please. So when you are casting your vote, keep in mind that you may submit only one vote for either the whole collection of the core LEA documents, as I showed on the previous slide, or you may select individual documents from that core collection and vote for each of them one time. So whichever might be relevant to you or your area of focus. A vote of agree means that you fully approve the final draft of the document or documents selected, and a vote of disagree, of course, means that you do not approve of the final draft. So voting is open for a 1-week period until the 22nd of December. So please vote as soon as possible to avoid missing the opportunity. We're really hoping to get a balanced representation from across the industry and our IWG members. So following the counting of votes, we will be in touch with the IWG regarding whether or not consensus was met and any next steps on continued deliberation in the event it was not met. So that's all for me. And we can move to the next slide.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I just want to say, everybody, in the chat function, you will see the links. Oops, sorry. You'll see the links that have been, oh my goodness. My screen is going a bit crazy now. You'll see the links that Larissa has put in there for the JOT form and support that we've had ever since we began this process. And your work is almost done, just the voting. So for the impact incentives, I want to start with a super quick overview of the impact incentives. And we developed these as a solution to address the long and complex nature of the leather supply chain. We needed an effective and efficient solution for brands to connect with the farmers at the beginning of the chain, to communicate and give support for their expectations with regards to animal welfare and deforestation or conversion-free practices. And the impact incentives are basically an evolution of credit trading system, but with some important differences. The first is that it's not a blind trading system. Brands that buy impact incentives from producers will know who those producers are and have some core information about their operations and the impact they're delivering. Secondly, by working as an alliance across commodities, we're defining common minimum thresholds that must be met by every participating producer. So for example, to sell a deforestation conversion-free incentive or DCF incentive, the producer must meet the accountability framework definition of zero gross deforestation. And that includes meeting common verification and data reporting requirements. And that's whether they're farming for beef, soy, or well, leather. And thirdly, we've developed the impact partnership model, where brands can deliver financial support to on-the-ground partners that will work with those farmers who cannot yet meet the thresholds we have set. This gives the opportunity to deliver longer-term support where it's needed most. And by combining our efforts as an alliance and by working with many others, we can really capitalize on the potential of the incentives to accelerate change. Given the urgency with which we need to address the issues facing this planet, we need a solution that will enable us to act big and act fast. And the impact incentives offer an opportunity for us to scale up across commodities and to bypass the time and cost it would take to set up traceable supply chains. Their transparency increases both their credibility and their value, and the data that we generate will make them even more powerful. The flexibility to be used by multiple commodities such as soy, beef, and leather and cotton means that they will provide increased value both for the brands that are buying these multiple commodities and the farmers or landscapes that are producing them. And a key role of the Impact Alliance will be to protect the credibility of the impact incentives and to look for further opportunities to collaborate and expand on their impact. So that's a very fast overview. And the impact incentives were officially launched on October 26th. The webinar is available at the Impact Incentives website. There's also a short 3-minute video that's a lot of fun to watch, or at least I think so. And the other news that's been really welcomed by us is that we did receive an ISEAL Landscapes grant. And they've been really, that grant has meant a huge amount to us, not just for the financial support, but by all the organizational support that ISEAL gives to their grantees and the other grantees that we end up working with. So for 2021, we're going to be piloting with all of the members and certainly with with leather. And as a teaser, this is the graphic recording that was done by Carlotta, who sat in on our breakout session for impact incentives. And you can see a big theme building up here, but using the impact incentives to support changes at the farm level and certainly connecting with cattle. So I'm going to end that and go straight through to the Climate Plus strategy. And I would like to introduce to you our COO, our new COO, Claire Bergkamp. And Claire, take it from here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. I'm just going to give a little overview and reminder insight into the strategy. Those of you who were able to join us during the conference will have heard us talk about this quite a bit. But during the conference, we unveiled our Climate Plus strategy. This is the strategy that we're diving into in full force for the next 10 years. It's our vision till 2030. And the plus in the Climate Plus is stands for kind of two things. The first is that it's grounded in partnership, because we know that to achieve the 45% reduction by 2030, that this is an activity that we need to do collaboratively and together. So that means working across industries, that means working across organizations, and especially working in these types of groups with the roundtables. It also represents soil, biodiversity, and water, because the approach needs to be a holistic approach if we actually want to address and shift the tide on climate. As you heard Anne kind of talk about at the beginning, this is our vision for the future. You know, we really want to have a global textile industry and material industry that protects and restores the environment while enhancing lives. And we hope that this 2030 Climate Plus strategy will be a rallying call for the industry to come together and achieve this ambitious reduction target. Next slide. Back one. The other thing that's I think important about the strategy is that this is a big pivot for us. So we're moving from raising awareness to accelerating change and accelerating adoption. Not to say that that wasn't a focus before, but we're doubling down on this idea. We think that coming together, having the conversations is not enough to really make the change that is needed to achieve the 45% reduction. We have to focus on acceleration, on accelerating solutions that we know that work, on accelerating the adoption of preferred fibers. So I'm not going to read everything on the slide in the interest of time, but I think that this is the key idea, and especially this relates back to the roundtables and the work that happens here in these incredible communities. It's about focusing this energy towards driving for tangible solutions and tangible chains around looking for where we need data and accelerating the motion that we've already started. Next slide. And then some of you may have seen this slide also during the conference. And I think that it's important to kind of note it and talk about it because we are using this as our baseline for where we set the 45% reduction target. Leather obviously comes out quite high here, but we want to acknowledge that this is based on the MSI, and we know that this is not perfect data. We realize that it's a work in progress. Our long-term ambition is not to be reliant only on LCAs, but to take an LCA plus approach to thinking about data, trying to really understand impact on the ground and the nuance between different mechanisms for grazing, different mechanisms for farming, forestry on a local level. We want to move towards impact and towards the kind of some of the less tangible parts of what it is to produce materials and not only be reliant on LCAs. But we have used this as our baseline because we have to start somewhere. And this is the information that the industry is using right now. So while we know it's not perfect, we did want to acknowledge that this is, of course, out there. And we know that maybe in this group especially, it can be a controversial number. So acknowledging that and saying that in the future, our intention is to really expand the way that we look at impact beyond just LCAs. Next slide. And so to achieve this 45% reduction, this kind of gives you a visualization of what we're talking about. If we were to continue on the course that we're on, we would be at this upper line here. We cannot continue business as usual. We really have to take a pretty ambitious and aggressive approach to shifting the way that we produce and source our materials. We have to slow growth down. We cannot continue to grow at the rate we've grown at. To have any chance in achieving this 45% reduction, we have to slow things down to a 1% annual growth. We have to scale the use of preferred fibers, but we also have to understand that we need innovation. We need to look at really new ways of doing things. And these innovations are going to include things like regenerative practices and carbon sequestration through those regenerative practices. Soil and the way that we treat our land is going to be a big part of the solution. It's also important to acknowledge that in the previous slide in here, that the numbers and information that we're using right now in the MSI and in the kind of LCA community don't include things like regenerative. And so we know that there's a huge potential here. And it's another area where we know that we need to be getting better data and being able to model what that potential actually is. Next slide. And then just the kind of the wrap it all up for me, that I already mentioned on this a little bit, but we also know that we need to evolve the roundtables, that we need to be not only looking at, identifying challenges and leveraging our stakeholders and writing papers, but we also need to be looking more at data and what information we actually need to tangibly reach our goals and track our goals. That we need to map out the key players and identify where our alignment is towards those goals, identify any tools or mechanisms that have been developed. And I think that we've already heard a lot in this group about some of the incredible tools that are coming out, such as the Leather Impact Accelerator and impact incentives in general. I think that this is very exciting in this space. We need to connect content experts with innovators and brands to deliver on the goals. So, it is about still connecting and convening, but under the impetus of how do we actually drive things forward. And if we need to engage with governments or influence policy, that's on the table as well. And identifying and executing on gaps in Climate Plus activities in the sector, and any subgroups or task force that we really need to set up to tackle very specific challenges are all a part of this world. And so I'm very excited to be listening in today. And as Anne said, I'm also very new, so I'm learning as a bit as I go. But that's my kind of, I guess, final note again, is just to reiterate that for us, to achieve the Climate Plus, it is around focusing on acceleration. And it's certainly not to say that that wasn't the case before, but what it is to say is that we really need to come together and collectively drive towards actions that we know can make a difference on the ground, sequester carbon, and rethink the way that we source our materials. So I'm going to hand it back over to Anne, who's going to talk, I think, a little bit about the structure in this evolution.
Thank you so much, Claire. That's fantastic. Yeah, so just a bit of a background on the direction that we're shifting in a little bit, and the way we're looking at our work within Textile Exchange. And we're looking at all of the animal fibers materials together, and you'll see that we're now grouping, we've created a new roundtable, which is the Animal Fibers and Materials Roundtable, which is going to be addressing wool, mohair, alpaca, and cashmere. And I think that'll be a nice, powerful area to be working in. Down does not actually have a roundtable. It's italicized for that reason. But we do have the Responsible Down Standard, and we'll continue to support that. And then the Leather Roundtable will continue on. Our focus up until now has really been on getting that understanding of the issues and the opportunities and the stakeholders and developing the tools. And now as we move forward, we have to map out what's our path to help meet that Climate Plus goal, and to leverage all the work that we've done. What's really exciting to me is outside of these actual roundtables, there's so many opportunities for us to have cross-cutting work streams. So you can see we've got a number that are specific to animals, animal welfare being one, climate beneficial grazing, smallholder farmers, and then we actually have some actual standards. And different groups of animal materials and fibers are engaged in each one. And then these groups actually cut across even further into the plant-based materials. So issues like biodiversity and soil carbon and social issues, those are ones where we can really leverage the collective expertise across multiple commodities and multiple fibers and materials. So I think lots of opportunities here. Textile Exchange has developed a new terms of reference for the roundtables. They each have their own individual roundtable. I won't go into the details here, but they remap ourselves towards that Climate Plus goal. So I will, in the interest of time, just pass through these two slides. You can read them further on the website. And then there is going to be an actual link that Larissa will send to you, and it's going to be sent in the follow-up materials and so on. But what I want to do now is give everybody a well-earned break. You have 5 minutes. I encourage you to take at least 1 minute to stretch. And then at the top of the hour, I guess that gives you 6 minutes, we'll come back and we're going to lean into looking at how does leather really impact that Climate Plus goals, and how do we take action. So I'm going to put myself on mute and we'll see you back at the top of the hour. And for those of you who stuck around, you enjoyed my bad cow jokes. Okay, here we are. So just to be sure we're getting everybody engaged and warmed up for this next session, if you could use, sorry, it's not the chat, it's the Q&A function, and type in one thing that was interesting or new to you in the first part of this summit. So surprising issues, things that you're happy about, any information would be fantastic. It also lets us know that you're actually back. Ah, thank you. Great, we're seeing some information. I'm going to give a minute here for a couple of others to answer. Right, and just so you know, there have been some good, more technical questions that have been asked in the Q&A box. One recently about smallholder farmers, one about animal outcomes. So I encourage you to go and look through those as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk about moving forward, and I want to start by talking about the beef and leather connection. And I really want to reemphasize what Claire was saying. We are very aware that the data that has been reported in some of those Climate Plus slides that we've presented is based on LCAs that are somewhat limited in the data that they source. And also there's a really big question about the allocation that should be given to leather for the overall environmental or carbon footprint of a cow. There's arguments that it should be as low as 0 or something closer to 0, and then there's the level that it's at. So those discussions are happening outside of Textile Exchange. We're staying very closely connected to them, but there's other organizations that are working on trying to figure out, how do we get the better LCA data in, and how do we determine that final allocation? And we'll keep an eye on that. But in the end, for us, the baseline and those data are just indicators that this is an area that we need to focus on and make some kind of a positive impact. And I think everybody's on board for that. So the biggest area when we look at where we have the greatest opportunities is really at the beef, at the cattle production side. And our biggest opportunity is to work with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. They have been in existence for longer than we have, a few years longer, and they've set themselves up to be a really powerful organization. They're basically an umbrella organization for national roundtables that I think are they're all over the globe. I can't remember. Josefina, you can correct me. Is it 43 countries they're in, or is it 23?
23, like 11 national roundtables that represent like 23 countries in different parts of the world.
Yeah. So they're doing such a good job, and their goals and their principles are really aligning with ours, and we're working hard to be sure that they align more and more. And what I like about working with them is they have got the big voice into this beginning of the supply chain, and we've got a relatively small one. We don't have a lot of leverage to try to influence the way farmers adopt various practices. However, when you look at the bigger picture, we've got the big voice when it comes to consumers in the market. So it's a nice balancing act. And on that note, I wanted to ask Josefina to speak to the GRSV climate related goals.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Yes, well, as Anne said before, I'm working both for GRSV and Textile Exchange on the leather work. So I think it's very important, and as Anne said, to have this connection between the goals that Textile Exchange already has and the goals that we are working on at GRSV. So how it all started, at GRSV, we already had our principle and criteria, and all the national roundtables were developing their own national indicators. But we thought that was not enough, that the beef world and the consumers were expecting us to really show our progress and the change that we were doing. And there were some critical issues that we needed to be more proactive on our communication. So last year, we decided to refresh our strategic plan and really invest more on communication and really showing the progress that we are doing at national level and with the whole supply chain. So we have decided to set goals on these three key sustainability indicators, and we are going to add 2 or 3 more on the next years. So the 3 goals that we are in the process of developing are one on climate, on greenhouse gas. That is the one on the right side that I will read in detail later on. We have another one on animal welfare, that the overarching goal is based on mortality. So we are trying to decrease the mortality rate. And on the land use change, we are also working on traceability and different tools to really look for zero deforestation, or at least to decrease deforestation and conversion in the critical ecosystems around the world. The other 2 goals, I think they're going to be related. One for sure on social issues, and the other one, the third one, is either on antimicrobial use or other topics that are also very strategic of the beef supply chain. We expect to have them ready by April next year. So you will hear a big announcement on these 3 goals by next year. And also we will announce how the other 2 or 3 goals that we will develop on 2021. On the greenhouse gas, that I think is very related to the other goal that was presented before from Textile Exchange, we aim to reduce the carbon footprint of each unit of beef by 30% by 2030 on a pathway to climate neutrality. And of course, we think that 10 years is a long time, so we are going to report every year, but for sure by 2025, with all the 3 goals, we are going to make like a midterm report where we can really show the progress we have made. And well, there's a long document that if you are interested, I can share with you about why we are doing this. Of course, that we want to limit, there is an urgent global ambition to limit the temperature rises of 1.5 degrees. And how are we going to get there? Of course, we really need to start demonstrating, because there are already a lot of practices that are going on that we haven't really been able to demonstrate and measure that. So we are trying to demonstrate how the beef is produced with climate neutrality. And of course, we want to safeguard and build upon the carbon stores in the soil, because I think there is already a lot of sequestration that has been going on for many years in the soils, and there's still also many good practices, but we need to also be able to measure that and demonstrate the carbon sequestration that happens with most of the land that the producers manage. So yeah, so the idea is that we start working on this on the next 10 years, but we also investing a lot on communication and really showing with all the support of the scientists, all the progress that the beef supply chain is doing.
Great, thank you, Josefina. It's really exciting work. I've been sitting in a lot of these goals calls with the GRSB, and it's certainly a big challenge to set a meaningful goal, particularly when you're trying to work across so many regions and types of farming systems around the world. So we're glad that you're there doing all this work, and glad you're with us. So I wanted to take a few moments to build on the how that Josefina was talking about. Just give you an overview of the types of grazing systems that can be really solutions to not only reduce the carbon, but actually sequester it. And I think that it could be one of the most powerful things that we dig into. So I'm sure by now you've heard about regenerative grazing, holistic grazing, beneficial grazing, adaptive multi-paddock grazing. And I just want to be sure that everyone has an understanding of what these systems are actually doing and how they're going to help us meet those Climate Plus goals. And first, we need to understand that more and more land is turning to desert in every continent. And I'm also doing a lot of work on Kashmir, and that is a very sad reality for Mongolia. And this has knock-on effects to all aspects of our planet's climate, particularly when it comes to rain. When rain falls on degraded or desertified land, it either runs off the land or evaporates from the soil. On the other hand, healthy soil supports healthy plant life, which in turn supports biodiversity. It also retains carbon and water, and it helps to protect from extreme fluctuations in temperature. But let's take a moment and look back over history. So for millions of years, the natural interaction of wildlife, plants, and soil function together in a healthy, resilient cycle. So herds of wild animals were kept bunched closely together by the predators, and they were constantly moving on, leaving behind the dung and the urine, which fertilized the soil. And their movement over the land also helped to break up the soil and create the plant litter that would help with moisture retention and protecting that top layer. And then along came organized farming, and the problem of overgrazing in particular led to ecological problems. Overgrazed fields would have no plant litter to cover the soil. The plants would not have time to regenerate. And it's not just too many animals that's the problem, because undergrazing, or what's sometimes called over-resting, could also lead to or contribute to degradation. So without the natural tillage of the animals' hooves, and then their fertilization and the weed control, the soil can become exposed, and the plants that do grow there will get old, die, and that old leaf matter that at the top of the plant won't be ground down by the animals. And it'll kind of cover off and it'll prevent any new growth from happening. And again, the soil becomes hardened, the exposed soil becomes hardened, and we have those water issues that we're talking about, where it either just evaporates into the sky or runs off. So the good news is that there's been a lot of great work done on better grazing practices. And one of the groups that I'm really a big fan of is the Savory Institute. And they talk about holistic planned grazing, which restores land by mimicking what happened in nature when pack hunting predators kept those grazing animals bunched and moving. And the holistic grazing achieves the same effect by herding or by using movable fencing. And it also involves the farmers really learning to read the soil and understand the needs of their animals and to do a kind of a planned system. So in that planned system or managed grazing system, the livestock will trample again the leaves and the stems, loosen the hard earth, and fertilize the soil with the urine in their feces. And the effects that they have seen have been really impressive, like literally reversing the process of degradation to regenerate soils that sequester carbon, and that manage water and protect biodiversity in the ground level. So it's a great story. There are a ton of resources. I really encourage you to go visit the Savory Institute website, and we should include the link there. And there's many others as well. So how do we use the power of the leather industry to support these best practices? And we need to do it in a number of ways, using the best tools at our disposal. And this is where we really want to capitalize on all the work that we've all done for the last few years. So first there's LEA, and this is a tool that it gives a framework for brands to interact with their supply chains all the way to the farm level, but not only at the farm level, at all stages of leather production. The impact incentives, as we keep talking about them, they're a way to have that fast and direct action to stop deforestation and conversion. And we're going to be working more and more on the impact incentives and evolving the number of scopes that they have. And one of them we're looking at is how to define what is that holistic, regenerative, better grazing type of, or regenerative or holistic farming. And then we really hope to leverage the Impact Alliance to further expand the impact of all of our efforts. We're working across the multiple commodities. We currently have soy, sugar, cotton, leather, beef, and cage-free eggs. And we've got some strong interest from a number of other NGOs that are owning standards that want to join in with us. So there's lots of opportunities. We just have to be really smart about how we make use of them. And I do want to take a moment and talk about one of the impact incentives that is used for LEA that has direct impact on the Climate Plus goals, and that's our deforestation conversion free scope. And what we've done is we've aligned the definitions that we're using with the accountability framework. In every opportunity, every chance we get, we want to align with the actions that are being taken by other industry organizations so that we're not all off running in almost parallel directions on separate paths. We really want to converge everything to really meet these big goals. And the DCF requirement is for zero gross deforestation. That's quite strong. A lot of organizations are looking more at a zero net or even as just a no legal deforestation. All of those are really important, but we wanted to set up a high bar because this is something that the brands are going to be making claims about. And it's also something the brands are being pressured on by special interest groups and also the investor groups that are paying a lot of attention and pushing for deforestation-free supply chains, which impact incentives are a step towards that. So how are we going to move forward to this Climate Plus? I mean, this is the same of any project. We need to set our goals. We need to define our measurement system, and that's no mean feat. We need to establish a baseline, and the baseline, we've got a rough baseline. It's clearly imperfect. But the biggest issue with the baseline is we just want to know that we want to move forward from where we're at. I don't want to put too much energy in trying to be exactly specific on what is our carbon footprint for cattle right now. Then we have to figure out how, create our execution plan, execute, review, revise, and react, and then on it goes. So, and then remaining part of this summit, I really want to help start crowdsourcing some ideas to help us do this. So what we're going to be doing is looking at the goals, the measurement, and the strategy to move forward. And the way we're going to do this is with Mentimeter. So as I said, we are in a GoToWebinar format, given the number of participants. So we're not having the breakout rooms, which is a shame, but the Mentimeter is quite fun. So Larissa should have put in the link. Larissa, if you could put the link in, perfect. If you go to the link that is in the chat box, that link will take you directly to the Mentimeter page. The other thing is if you want to do it on your cell phone so that you can keep watching the screen, then feel free, you can have the two devices or iPad or whatever it is you're using. So I think, Stephanie, you're going to take over the screen sharing now, and you're going to drive the Mentimeter slides, and I can continue to talk to the questions we're going to ask.
Yep.
So Stephanie, are you good?
Yep, just bear with me for one moment, please.
Sorry.
Okay. Set up here. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. We've got the first question up there.
Some people are already
got
answering.
some answers, so yeah.
So you, as you answer, you'll be, for those of you who are doing the Mentimeter on the screen, I encourage you to go from the Mentimeter screen over to the Zoom meeting screen, and you can see where the answers are coming through, and it's a word cloud. So the ones that get the biggest push or the biggest support are jumping up, and it's a constantly evolving landscape. Wow. Wow, okay, that's fantastic. So I'm sure some more responses are going to come in, but clearly deforestation is a key issue, and I'm glad to see that. I'm sure we've been feeding that message to you for a while, but I think it probably does reflect a lot of the pressure that brands are facing, and it is where a huge amount of our carbon is trapped or stored right now, and we want to continue doing that. I just want to have a quick word about the way that we will be addressing deforestation through the LEA. And it's a lot of it's through these program partnerships. And what they're doing is they're helping farmers become more productive with the land that they're already on, so that they don't have that need to cut down their treed areas. The other thing that one of the pilot programs that we're looking at is what they're focusing on is firefighting training and fire prevention training, because there's been a huge loss, as you'll know. There were a lot of fires in Brazil recently, and they were having a big impact. So grazing systems and animal welfare are the other two. And I think we'll have to add up all the different parallel words and see what it all adds up to. But yeah, thank you. This is fantastic. All right, if you go to the next question, Stephanie. So, oh boy, everybody's leaping forward. So yeah, we want to know, who do we work with? And this is really helpful information for us. The more specific you can be, if you have links, even, you can send them to us separately or follow up with us later on. The work that we've done so far, we're just so thankful for these different organizations. And I can see a lot of different names popping up that we definitely want to connect into, particularly around the beneficial grazing work. Food industries, that's a good one, yep. Okay, I think we're pretty good there. If you could go to the next slide. Oh, everybody's so keen. I don't know, the Mentimeter is new for us to work with, so I didn't realize you're obviously seeing the questions. So which industry and global targets most deserve our attention? So the fashion industry charter for climate action with UNFCCC is #1. And I hope that there's a lot of brands that are on this call that have already signed on to that charter. And if not, please let us know. We'd be happy to direct you on how to get there. The Sustainable Development Goals is another one. And I think I like the fact that these are real global goals, that we're not trying to break everything apart. We're trying to really align actions. Some of these, not just in leather, they're going to cut across multiple commodities. The Fashion Pact is another one that's been that's quite powerful. There's a lot of focus within the Fashion Pact on biodiversity, and it does have some specific commitments that are related to leather in some of the commitments, some of the optional commitments. One of them, I think, is to be feedlot free, which we don't necessarily give, we don't enable through LEA, but there's probably ways that you can ensure that through working with our tools. All right, next one. So also had asked, what other industry and global goals deserve our attention? So, the United Nations Race to Zero, excellent. Paris Agreement, Science-Based Targets Initiative, water conservation, end of product life solutions, food industry, water pollution, public-facing transparency on consumption. Yeah, these are excellent, very good ideas. Science-based target is coming up a lot, and that's great. We are in a lot of conversations with them. We are helping to develop the science-based targets around biodiversity, as well as the carbon ones. And I've had some initial conversations with the Science-Based Target Network about how would impact incentives fit into the targets that brands are setting. We recognize it cannot deliver on a science-based target, but I think they certainly play a really big role in supporting the kind of change that we're looking for. And interesting to see the end of life planning. Okay, next one. So what do we need to measure and report on for leather in addition to carbon? So this is, oh God, it spins as it changes. Yeah, it's quite evenly proportioned. Soil health, biodiversity, animal welfare, water, and also social. And yeah, it speaks to one of the challenges we deal with at Textile Exchange all the time, and I'm sure everybody deals with, is there's so many different areas that are so important to focus on. And, you know, all of them are hugely important, but we have to figure out where to prioritize our actions so that we're dealing with the ones where we can leverage our impact the most, and also that we'll deal with the most critical issues. So soil health is a really big one. And I like soil health links quite closely to biodiversity and water, because if a lot of the world's biodiversity sits under the soil, and a lot of the solutions for water at the farming level really rely on soil health. It'd be interesting to hear from folks when they're thinking of water. Are you thinking of water in the context of leather production and processing, or is it at the farm level, or both? So I suppose if you wanted to send any comments, and I know we're limited in our format here, but you could put them in through the Q&A chat box if you also want to elaborate on anything. Okay, next one. So what else do we need to measure and report on for leather? So carbon is obviously a big one. We're already doing that. But water, biodiversity, waste is an interesting one. Chemicals. And Textile Exchange, our climate plus goals and our whole focus is really on what we call the tier 4 part of the supply chain. So it's the raw materials production, which means that when it comes to things like the chemistry that's used in processing and so on, we just want to align with the right people who are addressing these issues and bring all of our stakeholders into connection with them, and you know, basically share the information and awareness of opportunities. And every now and then we'll delve in with some kind of an action, and you know, the Leather Impact Accelerator is an example of that. So yeah, so waste, water, biodiversity, traceability. Traceability is definitely going to be coming up. It's built into the Leather Impact Accelerator, and then the requirements for traceability will evolve, particularly as the work of the UNECE evolves. So that's great. Next one. So are any specific KPIs, key performance indicators, that we should look at? And we definitely wanted to keep our examples limited so that we didn't lead you down too many paths. So it looks like we've got some great ones. Preserved forest area, ecological outcome verification. That's what the Savory Institute uses. Again, the area of the farm, a preserved forest, waste, soil carbon accruals over decades, not only annually. And that's definitely going to be a challenge. Any kind of a farm-based measurement is going to be very subject to the long timelines that it takes to build up carbon, and then also the changes that can happen based on the weather that happens. You know, in a poor crop year, farmers might be forced to do a bit more tillage, which release more carbon, and so on. Animal welfare is definitely in there. A lot about forest area, durability of the leather, and that's such a good point. Leather often gets lumped in with all of the other materials, particularly when we're looking at an LCA, which just looks at the like the materials, the MSI that did the data that we use for our Carbon Plus goal really looked at the impacts of the materials at the raw material stage. But when you look over the broader life cycle of a product like leather, it has really good benefits. It's such a durable material. And there's a great example that was given by one of the industry members about comparing a plastic spoon to a metal spoon, where a plastic spoon might have a higher impact, but it's a disposable item and it doesn't last so long, and a metal spoon will last forever. Okay, transport time, slaughter methods. These are going to be really good. One of the things we're doing with the impact incentives is we're setting some questions that we're asking the farmers to fill in, so that every time when you buy an impact incentive, you'll have that specific data and KPIs that are linked to the impact incentives that you bought. So as much as possible, we'll try to integrate some of these ones in, and things like the amount of carbon that is sequestered. That's something that's going to have to be built in over time when there are agreed upon ways to measure that soil carbon, and economical ways as well. But we are definitely measuring the amount of farm area and the amount of preserved area, and then a lot of data around, the number of animals, the types of farming system, and also asking the farmers to identify if they are in a high conservation value area. Water reserves, good. All right, next one. So the other one was, what kind of data systems do we look at? And again, this is us shamelessly crowdsourcing this group of stakeholders. We do have to understand what are the baselines, not just for the carbon footprint, but the biodiversity one and the soil and so on. So we want to align any kind of measurements and reporting with other systems that others are using, so that people aren't taxed with having to interface with many, many systems. And again, all of this data will lead out to these bigger goals that we've all addressed. So science-based targets is a very big one. The Savory Institute work, a big one. Gold standard. We'll probably be hearing more about the gold standard. They are attempting to set a kind of a common way of reporting on carbon across different systems. So they will probably link in with helping us all report to the science-based targets. And they're actually one of the other organizations that has received an ICL Landscapes grant. All right, next one. Oh, so just some free text here on what other data systems should we look at. The LEAP guidelines, excellent. I know that is what the GRSB is using for their footprinting. Leather Working Group, they've been a primary resource to us all along. We've based our leather production benchmark on the LWG bronze. Carbon Disclosure Project, more SBTs, Planetary Boundaries is a good one. Carbon Footprinting, Carbon Disclosure Project, focusing on outcomes, not being prescriptive about practices. Yeah. LCA primary data. Yeah. Okay. Next one, Stephanie. All right, so this is the big one. What are the strategies to focus on? And this is where we have to really think about, where do we put our energy? And we've given a number of suggestions that we wanted you to choose from and help us prioritize. And I believe we forced you into having, I think, just two. You're only able to set two suggestions. And it doesn't look like anything is popping out, probably because we left it as a free text. So, the strategies that we're looking at, and we're going to try to do all of them, of course, to some degree. We've developed the Leather Impact Accelerator. We really want to focus in the new year of promoting the use of LEA And part of that might be through setting industry targets. And those are still to be determined. They could be a target that's based around impact, or there could be kind of shorter term targets saying that we want, all companies to make a corporate commitment with the Leather Impact Accelerator. We want 50 companies. Well, all of that needs to be determined, but hopefully that'll be something where we can really get everybody engaged and acting forward. Yeah, landscape pilots is another one that's popping up, and that's a really interesting area for us. We've been having some interesting conversations with groups like PCI and Landscale, where they're looking in ICEAL about how to address either a landscape or a jurisdiction that it's like a geographic area that is defined either through a kind of a landscape boundary or a jurisdictional one, and then looking at all the different types of activities that are going on there and try to align the reporting on those activities so that everybody is part of a bigger whole, and you can really accelerate the change that's happening in that way. Nice to see Leah in the middle. Thank you very much. I think that's going to be a good way to pull together a lot of this action. The other thing that just in the notes that we put forward is to expand the scopes addressed by the impact incentives. So regenerative agriculture is a scope that we would be looking at, and it's not that easy to define what that is, and figure out, how do we either benchmark or verify that a farm is engaging in regenerative agriculture. But I do think it will be really helpful and powerful for us to meet some of those other goals that have been identified by this group as being important, such as soil health and biodiversity. Collaboration. Yep, there's no way we're going to do it without that. Okay, well, this is really fantastic. Next slide. I think that might be it, huh? Yes, other thoughts on how to meet our goals. So we need to bring brands together and get them into the action zone. We've been talking at you for so long. We need to give you a very clear path forward on how to act. Implement traceability systems, setting specific targets, joining forces, working with the LWG, addressing leather versus plastic. Yep, that's a good one. A theme that's popped up a few times is this is a long-term approach. And I agree. I guess it's a question of perspective. We've given ourselves 10 years, and I think the world has given itself 10 years with the climate change targets that have been happening. The goal is to bring the temperature within 1.5 degrees. Our Climate Plus goal is based on getting it to 2.5 degrees above the baseline temperature. So this is the decade of action. This is a decade of change. And for those of you with children, I think we're all of us, whether you have children or not, are pretty motivated to dig in deep on this stuff. So and focus on improving traceability. Yeah, so that's a good question or point there. So nothing can be achieved until the supply chain is fully identified, transparent, and engaged. And I would actually argue back on that. The impact incentives are a way for brands to support action immediately. You can buy impact incentives before you have your whole supply chain mapped out and tracked all the way through to the farms. You can go out there and you can support farms to stop deforesting immediately or to support animal welfare. And but what we've built into the system with the impact incentives and through the LEA corporate commitments is that we're trying to get the brands to map in one direction along the supply chains. We're getting the farmers to be engaging with traceability systems so that over time the brands can link their supply chains back to groups of farmers who are hopefully ready to be part of a full traceability system. And brands can either be buying the impact incentives from farms that are in their known supply sheds, if they know kind of the general area where their leather is coming from and the farms that are feeding into their leather supply chain, or they can just choose to focus on areas of really high impact, like the Cerrado, the Chaco, the Amazon. So, but the ultimate goal is to have full traceability and deforestation-free sourcing. So what else? Impact partnerships supporting regenerative agriculture. Perfect. Okay. I think we've scrolled through most of them. Stephanie, next one. Ah, great. So I'm not sure if I will go, I can share my screen again. And there's actually not a lot to show. It's just the Q&A section. So we do have some time left. I wasn't sure how long the Mentimeter was going to happen. So what I'd like to do is move to the Q&A. We can, Larissa had noted that you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can speak. But right now what I want to do is address some of the Q&A that are open right now. So I'll start with Johan. You said, I know that lamb or sheep leather isn't relevant for all responsible leather members, but as the second most common leather out there, would it be worth to explore collaboration opportunities between RLRT and the work of the Responsible Animal Fibers Roundtable? And I can say a big yes to that. In fact, we've already had a specific request from a farmer in, I think, New Zealand, who had both sheep and cattle on their farm, and they wanted to tie in with the impact incentives and the RLRT, and they were also producing sheep skins. So we've talked about those cross-cutting work streams that are going to come out of the roundtables, and in certain areas like the climate beneficial grazing and animal welfare, that will be cross-cutting across the different fibers. I think what we don't know yet is when will we ever develop a specific tool that will address sheep leather. It will come. It's just going to be a question of timing and resources, I think. All right, then another point, soil health, when tied to regenerative practices, implies holistic land management, grass grazing, better water retention through cover crops, carbon sequestration, biodiversity through elimination of monocrops, etc. Thank you. I think there are many people with much more expertise on this topic than I do. And I know from the research I've done, it's incredibly complex, but it's one of the most hopeful things I've looked into is how to really manage soil health. Michelle is asking, what is HIG? Apologies. HIG is the HIG index. It was initially developed by the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. They're now, I think, a separate entity, and they have an overall system for all parts of the supply chain to measure their impacts. And does conversion-free mean the grain fed to cattle is traceable to a non-converted cropland? Wow, good question. No, conversion-free in the context that we are doing, applying it through the impact incentives, is just about the farms that the cattle are on. We do not address what you might call embedded deforestation. We're not dealing with that. We're aware of it. We've thought about it. It is simply becomes just too complex for us to focus on. I do think, however, that for brands that really want to be more sophisticated in how they address those kind of impacts in their supply chain, we can look at ways with the impact incentives to calculate the amount of embedded soy or cattle feed in your leather or meat. And then that could easily be addressed through the use of impact incentives for soy. So very complicated. It's going to be very technical, but conceptually, it's all possible, I think. Another point, can the issue of tanneries and the processes be addressed? The process is a high pollutant. And I'd say, well, we are addressing tanneries through the Leather Impact Accelerator and the Leather Production Benchmark. We didn't talk a lot about that because we hadn't done a lot of changes. But if you go to the website, you will see the whole benchmark as it applies to leather. And it does address, it puts quite a bit of focus in on water pollution and so on. Deborah, is there anything that you'd want to say to that?
Sorry, just had to unmute myself there.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I think there are lots of initiatives that are out in the industry right now, and there is lots of new work being done around production methods, around innovation, around new technologies. There's some great new tanning technologies that have just been released the latter half of this year. And alongside innovation around reduction in energy use and water use in production. So there is a lot going on. And we've said it before, it's also about how we all work together to combine the efforts of all the different associations that are in the industry and bring all of that information together into a cohesive method for communication externally to the consumer. So really, I think the next couple of years, you'll see a lot more work being done at grassroots level in the high leather producing countries to really start raising the bar. And LEA is part of that solution. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And maybe before you move to another question, I think Yuan raised his hand for quite a while.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you,
Yeah.
Larissa.
He
You want to unmute
can speak
him?
now. Yeah, yeah. Yuan, can you speak?
Is that Johan?
Hello, yes, it's Jan.
Yes, we can hear you.
I didn't especially ask to speak up, so I don't know if. I mean, I think.
Oh, the hand was raised. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't do this on purpose.
No problem.
Because and you perfectly answered my questions, and I think definitely on the collaboration between the Leather Roundtable and the Animal Fibers Roundtable, would be super happy to contribute however we can, because that's a material that is quite significant for us. And where I think basically the leather part could benefit from the great work that's been done on the fibers. And as you said, many of these farmers might rear both cattle and sheep, and all might rear sheep for what they would sell the hides on top of the fiber as well. So I think it's super if we can explore that. But no, you answered my my question, so I'm sorry about the hand.
That's fine. Always good to hear your voice, Johan. So the last question that's popped up is whether LEA is also looking at organic farming as a good option to meeting its goals. And it's interesting. We're working on organic farming in so many ways at Textile Exchange. In fact, the genesis of Textile Exchange, we began as Organic Exchange, and our whole mandate for the first 10 years or so was to grow the supply and demand for organic farming, for organic cotton specifically. But we're looking at organic in many ways. With respect to LEA and the impact incentives, an organic standard could potentially be used to demonstrate the two current scopes of LEA, the animal welfare and the deforestation conversion free protocol, the different organic standards that are out there, And usually they're a national standard and they all have different elements to them. So they could be used in that way. But then separately, Textile Exchange has work being done. We're connected to the work on the regenerative organic cotton. But then there's also work that we're doing, and it doesn't even have a proper name yet. We'll call it the SFP, which is the acronym we're using right now, but it's not a proper name. But we are looking at trying to define a kind of a regenerative type of standard or set of benchmarks that will help map farms or address that gap between conventional farming and organic farming and that kind of middle place. BCI's in there, but it would be a bit more specific than maybe what BCI is doing. So, and it would apply across all fibers. So it's kind of a confusing and vague answer because we're really just trying to map it out and figure out where it's going to end up. But I think once that SFP, kind of more sustainable farming practices type of standard or tool gets developed, that will help us meet the LEA goals, and we'll be giving a nod to organic in some way. So Claire, is there anything you'd want to say to that? I had to waffle around a little bit there. No. Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end. I can't thank everybody enough for all your time and attention, not just today, but over the years. And we certainly look forward to staying in touch with you. And my Christmas gift, holiday gift to all of you will be the last 8 minutes of this hour. So thank you so much and have a great holiday, and we'll see you in the new year.